The skyline of New York did not look like the movies. To the Sharma family, peering through the scratched windows of a yellow cab in late autumn, it looked like a jagged, grey ribcage. Deepak and Meena sat in the back, their knuckles white around the handles of their overstuffed suitcases. Between them sat Arjun, 16, and Priya, 14. The children were silent, watching the neon blur of queens pass by. They were carrying more than clothes. They carried the weight of a souled ancestral home in Nagpur and the crushing expectation of the American dream. The dream manifested as a basement apartment in Jackson Heights. It smelled of damp concrete and turmeric. Deepak, once a senior branch manager at a national bank in India, spent his first week scouring newspapers and job boards. He wore his best-pressed shirt to every interview, only to be met with the same cold refrain. You don't have local experience. Your accent might be a problem for our clients. We need someone who understands the American market. Within a month, the savings were thinning. The cold began to seep through the walls, and survival eclipsed prestige. I found work, Deepak announced one evening, his voice hollow. He wasn't at a bank. He was pumping gas at a station in Long Island City, working the graveyard shift. Meena, who held a master's degree in literature, began washing dishes in the back of a busy Punjabi deli. Within weeks, her hands were raw and cracked from industrial soap. The plan had been simple: enroll Arjun and Priya in the local high school immediately, let the children build the future while the parents rebuilt their footing. But the math didn't add up. Rent, heating, legal fees for visa adjustments. The parents' meager wages couldn't cover it all. It's just for a few months, Deepak whispered to Meena one night, though he couldn't meet her eyes. Until we get on our feet. Arjun is strong. He can help. The conversation with Arjun was the hardest thing Deepak had ever done. Arjun was a math prodigy. He had dreamt of MIT. Beta, Deepak said, sitting on the edge of the twin mattress. School. It will have to wait. There's a grocery store 3 blocks away. They need someone to stock shelves and deliver bags. They pay in cash. Arjun looked at him and saw new lines in his father's face, smelled the gasoline that wouldn't wash off. He swallowed. I understand, Papa, he said. A week later, it was Priya's turn. A local woman needed a helper, someone to watch her 3 toddlers and clean her house while she worked. It was under-the-table work. But I want to go to 9th grade, Priya cried, her voice bouncing off the basement walls. I'll fall behind. I won't know the English they speak here. You will study at night, Meena promised, pulling her close. We will buy the books. This is just the beginning. We are a team. For the next year, the Sharma children became ghosts of the education system. While other teenagers carried backpacks and argued about prom, Arjun carried crates of milk and Priya carried other people's children. The racism they encountered wasn't always a shouted slur. Often it was quieter, suffocating in its casual certainty. At the grocery store, a customer once threw a crumpled $5 bill at Arjun's feet because he didn't move fast enough. Do you even speak English? The man barked. Or did you drop off the boat yesterday? Arjun, who could solve calculus in his head, picked up the bill and forced his voice steady. I'm sorry, sir, have a nice day. He learned early that anger was a luxury. A fight meant police. Police meant deportation. Priya faced a different cruelty. Mrs. Gable treated her like furniture. She spoke about the help on the phone while Priya stood in the room, saying things like, they're lucky to be here. Back where they're from, they'd be living in dirt. Priya would scrub harder, tears stinging hot behind her eyes. She missed poetry. She missed being a child. As months became years, the gap between the Sharma kids and their peers widened into a canyon. Arjun grew tall and thin. His eyes lost their spark. He worked 10-hour shifts at construction sites now, hands calloused and scarred. Math books stopped calling to him. They began to feel like artifacts from another life. When he saw teenagers in varsity jackets walking home from the local high school, he felt a sharp, bitter ache. Priya, now 16, became the primary housekeeper for 3 different families. She mastered the art of being invisible. Her English became fluent, but it was the English of service. Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. Right away. One evening, Deepak came home to find Arjun staring at a tattered SAT prep book he had pulled from a dumpster. You should sleep, beta, Deepak said gently. You have the 5 a.m. shift. Arjun snapped the book shut. What for, Papa? To dream about a life I'm never going to have? I've missed years of school. I'm a dropout who never even dropped in. Deepak felt the words like a punch. Survival had started to look like theft. The breaking point came on a humid July afternoon. Deepak had been promoted to shift lead at the gas station, more responsibility, barely more pay. A group of local youths pulled in, loud and restless, looking for trouble. They filled their tank and tried to drive off without paying. When Deepak stepped out to stop them, they didn't just flee. They stopped. Hey, Gandhi! Move! One yelled. Deepak stood his ground. They climbed out, grinning. They didn't only want free gas. They wanted humiliation. They shoved him to the pavement, laughing as they called him a sand-dweller, and told him to go back to the jungle. Deepak didn't fight back. He lay on the asphalt, smelling gasoline and heat, praying they wouldn't kick him in the ribs. That night, bruised and shaking, he came home. The family gathered in the dim basement light. No one spoke for a long moment. We are going to the school tomorrow, Meena said finally, her voice like iron. We can't afford it, Deepak whispered. We cannot afford not to, she snapped. Look at our son. Look at his hands. He is a man of toil at 17. Look at Priya. She has forgotten how to laugh. We didn't come here to be servants. We came here to be more. The return to education wasn't a cinematic montage. It was a bureaucratic nightmare. Their legal status was still in process, and the school district stacked hurdles like it was their job. Arjun enrolled in a GED program, sitting among adults twice his age. Shame pressed on him until he opened the math section. The numbers didn't care about his accent or his scars. Priya was placed in a bridge program. She was older than her classmates, a giant among freshmen. Girls whispered about her thrift store clothes and the bleach that clung to her skin from early morning cleaning jobs. They worked 4 hours before school and 5 hours after. Arjun studied by the light of a refrigerator in the grocery store basement during breaks. Priya recorded her history lectures on a cheap phone and listened while scrubbing bathrooms. That first winter in Jackson Heights was not the sparkling wonderland Priya had seen in old Hollywood movies. It was an enemy that seeped through the cracks of their basement window frames like a slow flood. In Nagpur, heat was predictable, heavy, constant. Here, cold was sharp and deceptive. They couldn't afford down jackets, so they layered thin sweaters under thin windbreakers. We look like onions, Priya joked one morning, trying to make Meena laugh, her breath a thick white puff. The boiler was old and temperamental. The landlord, who only appeared when rent was due, ignored their calls about frozen pipes. One night in January, the temperature dropped to 10 degrees Fahrenheit. The family huddled in the living area around a buzzing space heater bought secondhand. Is this what we traded our home for? Arjun asked, trembling from more than cold. He had spent the day delivering groceries on a rusted bicycle, fingers numb on the handlebars. He'd slipped on black ice and ruined a gallon of milk. The shop owner deducted the cost from his pay. Deepak rubbed his son's arms to bring back circulation. We traded a ceiling for a horizon, Arjun, he said softly. It's just a very cold horizon right now. The racism that winter was the racism of invisibility, the way people stepped around them on the subway as if they were part of the architecture. The way customers spoke louder and slower to Meena, assuming her accent meant a lack of intelligence. And still, the family found warmth in defiance. Every night, after jobs were done, they sat around the small kitchen table. Priya practiced English by reading cereal boxes and old newspapers. Arjun taught his father the math needed for the gas station ledgers. Meena mended torn clothes and told stories of Indian kings and heroes, her degree now a quiet flame used to keep her children standing. They were missing dances and sports and carefree friendships. They were losing their youth, yes. But they were building something dense and unbreakable. Deepak watched them from the hallway shadows, heart breaking and swelling at once. He knew he had stolen their childhood, but he was determined to buy them a future, with interest. By the time Priya turned 17, she had been cleaning Mrs. Gable's house for nearly 3 years. Mrs. Gable lived among white carpets, expensive candles, and polite cruelty. To her, Priya wasn't a girl with dreams. She was a convenience. One Tuesday, while Priya scrubbed baseboards, she overheard Mrs. Gable speaking to a friend in the kitchen. "It's actually quite sad," Mrs. Gable sighed, her voice carrying easily. "The girl has no ambition. I've tried to give her extra hours, but she's so slow. These people, they come here and they're content just to scrape by. I suppose it's still better than whatever hut she came from in India. Honestly, I'm doing her a favor by keeping her employed. Without me, she'd be on the streets." Priya froze. Grey water dripped from her sponge onto the pristine floor. For years she had swallowed the "yes, ma'ams" and the "I'm sorries." She had let her education slide so her family could eat. But hearing her life, and her country, reduced to a hut snapped something inside her. She stood, knees cracking, and walked into the kitchen without wiping her hands. "I lived in a brick house in Nagpur, Mrs. Gable," Priya said, voice steady. "It had a garden and a library. My father was a manager. My mother is a scholar." Mrs. Gable startled, nearly spilling her coffee. "Priya." "I didn't. You shouldn't be eavesdropping." "I am not content to scrape by," Priya continued, stepping closer. "I am working here because this country didn't know what to do with my father's brilliance. I am working here so my brother can finish his GED. And I am slow today because I stayed up until 3 a.m. studying for my own exams." She removed her yellow rubber gloves and laid them on the granite counter. "I won't be coming back on Thursday. Or ever. You aren't doing me a favor, Mrs. Gable. You are paying for labor you don't deserve." Priya walked out without waiting for her week's pay. She was terrified. They needed that money, but for the first time in years, she felt like she was breathing American air, not the dust of someone else's floor. 2 weeks later, the mail arrived in the cramped Jackson Heights hallway, a thick white envelope addressed to Arjun Sharma. The family gathered around the small kitchen table. The air went tight. Deepak hadn't left for his shift. Meena's hands were still damp from the deli. "Open it, Beta," Deepak said, barely a whisper. Arjun tore the envelope. Inside was a certificate and a transcript. "I didn't just pass," Arjun said, scanning the numbers. Then he laughed, a sound that had been missing from their home for too long. The counselor attached a note. "My scores. They're in the 99th percentile. There's a flyer for City University. They have a scholarship program for high-scoring GED graduates." Meena sobbed and pressed her forehead to Arjun's shoulder. "I'm going to be an engineer, Papa," Arjun whispered. "I'm going to build things that don't break. Not like this basement." Deepak reached across the table and took his son's hand. He looked at the scars on Arjun's knuckles, the grease stains, the nicks from wire. "You already built something, Arjun," Deepak said, eyes wet. "You built a bridge for us to cross. Now you walk over it." That night, For the first time since they had arrived in the US, they didn't talk about bills. They spoke about the future. Priya told them she had applied to volunteer at a legal aid clinic. She was done cleaning houses. Meena decided she would look for a job at a library, even if it paid less, just to be near books again. Deepak felt the weight on his chest loosen. The struggle wasn't over. They were still poor. The stares still came, and the "where are you really from?" questions. But the silence of their missing education had been replaced by the loud, beautiful noise of ambition. They were no longer only surviving. They were finally, painfully, starting to live. The harvest. Years later, the Sharma family stood in a stadium. The air was thick with cut grass and expensive perfume. Arjun walked across the stage. He wasn't receiving a high school diploma. He was receiving his doctorate in structural engineering, an average life bypassed by a terrifying work ethic forged in desperation. Priya sat in the audience as a civil rights attorney, specializing in labor law, protecting the invisible workers like the girl she used to be. Deepak and Meena looked older than their years. Their backs had the slight bend of decades of manual labor. They still lived modestly. They still counted pennies, not because they had to anymore, but because it was written into their bones. As Arjun took his degree, he found his parents in the crowd. He didn't see the unskilled immigrants the world once saw. He saw the architects of his life. The racism hadn't vanished, it had changed shape. The struggle hadn't ended, it had moved to another battlefield. But as the family walked out of the stadium, they didn't look down. They looked at the skyline, no longer a ribcage, but a line of peaks they had learned to climb. They had lost childhoods, status, and comfort. But they had saved each other. Epilogue. The view from the bridge. 10 years later, the humid New York summer felt different. It didn't feel like a wait. It felt like a witness. The Sharma family gathered on a terrace in Long Island City, overlooking the East River. The skyline was the same one they had seen from the taxi window a decade earlier, only now, the vantage point had changed. They were no longer looking up from basement cracks, they were looking out from a height. Arjun stood by the railing in a sharp linen suit, now a senior structural engineer for the city, overseeing a massive bridge renovation. His hands were smooth, old scars faded into thin white memories. His days were calculations, stress loads, wind resistance, ensuring what he built would stand for 100 years. Priya sat at the table, laptop open beside a plate of appetizers. She had just finished a closing argument in a pro bono case for undocumented workers denied their wages. In court, they called her the Hammer, a lawyer with a ferocity born from knowing exactly what it meant to be invisible. "Papa, come sit," Priya said, pulling out a chair. Deepak and Meena moved more slowly now, but with quiet dignity. Deepak had left the gas station years ago to become a bookkeeper at a non-profit. Meena was a head librarian. They didn't have to work anymore. Their children could have carried everything. But they worked because, at last, they could. Deepak looked at his children, the professionals they had become, and the teenagers they had never been. He remembered missed proms, absent graduations, years that hardened their gazes into something older than age. "I was looking at old photos yesterday," Meena said softly, resting her hand on Arjun's arm. "From Nagpur. You were both so small. I used to worry the cold of this city had frozen your hearts." "It didn't freeze them, Ma," Arjun said, eyes on the bridge in the distance. "It tempered them. Like steel." Priya nodded. "We used to hate Mrs. Gable and the grocery store. But those places taught us the language of this country. Not the English in textbooks, the language of resilience. We learned how to fight before we learned how to lead." The racism hadn't vanished. It had become subtle, surprised looks when Priya was announced as lead counsel, the hesitation of contractors before accepting Arjun's authority. But now they had paper, degrees, titles, proof, shields they hadn't had before. As the sun lowered, gilding the Manhattan skyline, Deepak raised a glass. To the years we lost, he said, voice thick. And to the lives we found, Arjun replied, clinking his glass. They were an immigrant family. Not a fairy tale of instant wealth, but a saga of calculated loss and hard-won gain. They had paid for their American lives with the currency of youth. And in the twilight, sitting together above the river, they finally felt the debt was settled. The basement was gone. The cold was a memory. The Sharma family was finally home.